They told her crossing that river meant certain death, but 280 men were bleeding out on the other side, and she wasn't the kind of person who counted the cost before paying it. The explosions had stopped 3 hours ago, but the screaming hadn't. Corporal Rachel Keane pressed her back against the crumbling wall of what used to be a schoolhouse, her medical pack digging into her spine, and listened to the voices carried across the water. American voices, young voices, voices that were getting weaker by the minute. The Mekong River stretched before her like a living barrier, wide, brown, churning with debris and bodies and the wreckage of 2 downed helicopters. On the far bank, pinned against a muddy hillside with no cover and no way out, 280 Marines were dying. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. Rachel was 23 years old. She'd been in country for 7 months, and in that time, she'd learned that war didn't care about your training or your courage or how many prayers your mother whispered into her pillow back home. War cared about one thing: whether you were willing to move forward when every cell in your body was screaming at you to run. And right now, every single cell was screaming. The radio crackled beside her. "Keane, this is command. Evac choppers are 12 hours out. Weather's turned. You need to hold position and wait for reinforcements." The voice was calm, practiced, the kind of calm that comes from being 30 miles away from the dying. Rachel looked at the river, looked at the smoke rising from the far bank, looked at the handful of Marines huddled beside her. Good men, brave men, men who'd already done more than anyone should ever have to do. They were waiting for her to make the call, because that's what medics did. They made the impossible calls. 12 hours, she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else, across the river. Men wouldn't last 12 minutes without proper medical attention. She'd seen the casualties through her field glasses before the sun went down. Gut wounds, arterial bleeds, compound fractures with bone fragments visible through torn fatigues. The kind of injuries that turned strong young men into memories if you didn't act fast. She thought about her father then. He'd been a medic too, in a different war, on a different river. He'd told her once that the Hippocratic Oath didn't have an asterisk that said unless it's dangerous. He'd told her that some debts you pay with your life, because not paying them costs you something worse, your soul. Rachel stood up. The Marines beside her tensed. What are you doing, Doc?" It was Sergeant Morrison, 42 years old with 3 kids back in Nebraska. He already knew what she was doing. They all did. "I'm going across," she said, adjusting the straps on her medical pack. 50 pounds of gauze, morphine, plasma, and hope. "I need volunteers to help me carry supplies." Morrison grabbed her arm, not roughly, almost gently. "Keane, the Viet Cong own that river. They've got machine gun nests every 100 yards. You'll be dead before you reach the middle." "Maybe," Rachel said. She wasn't being brave. She was being honest. "But those men over there are definitely dead if I don't try. So what's it going to be?" "Sergeant, you going to let me cross alone? Or are you going to help me save some lives?" The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of all the things soldiers think about, but never say out loud. Wives, children, the smell of cut grass on a Saturday morning, the weight of a promise made to come home alive. Morrison released her arm. "I'll get the ropes," he said. Quietly, they worked fast. 3 ropes stretched across the river, anchored to trees on both banks by Marines who moved through enemy territory like ghosts. Rachel went first, her medical pack strapped to her chest, her hands gripping the rope, so tightly her knuckles went white. The water was cold, colder than she'd expected. It soaked through her fatigues and pulled at her legs, trying to drag her downstream. Halfway across, the first shots rang out. Bullets sliced through the water around her, sending up little geysers of spray that caught the last light of the setting sun. Rachel didn't stop, couldn't stop. Behind her, 2 Marines followed with supply packs, their faces set in expressions that looked carved from stone. One of them grunted as a round caught him in the shoulder, but he kept moving, kept pulling himself forward hand over hand while his blood turned the brown water pink. She thought she'd never make it across. She was wrong. Rachel's boots hit the far bank at 1847 hours. She didn't stop to catch her breath, didn't stop to check if she'd been hit. She just started moving uphill toward the sound of the wounded, her medical pack already open, her hands already reaching for the first soldier she saw. He was maybe 19, baby-faced beneath the mud and blood. He'd taken shrapnel to his abdomen and was holding his intestines in with his hands. "I got you," Rachel said, dropping to her knees beside him. "I got you, Marine. You're going to be okay." She didn't know if that was true, but she said it anyway. Because sometimes the medicine isn't in the morphine or the bandages. Sometimes it's in the voice that tells you you're not dying alone. For the next 11 hours, Rachel Keane performed miracles, not the kind with harps and halos, but the kind with dirty hands and desperate prayers. She triaged 180 casualties under sporadic enemy fire, working by flashlight and moonlight, and the burning light of her own refusal to quit. She tied off bleeders, set broken bones, held the hands of boys who cried for their mothers and told them stories about Nebraska and Texas and little towns in Oregon where nothing ever happened. She lied to men who were dying and told them they'd see home again. She told the truth to men who could be saved and made them promise they'd make it count. When the evacuation helicopters finally came at dawn, roaring out of the sunrise like mechanical angels, every single one of those 280 Marines was still breathing. Every single one went home. And when Rachel finally let herself collapse against the side of that helicopter, covered in other people's blood and too exhausted to even cry, she felt something she hadn't felt in 7 months of war. She felt whole. The military gave her a silver star. The Marines gave her their respect, which meant more. But what Rachel carried home wasn't the medal or the headlines or the letters from grateful mothers who'd gotten their sons back. What she carried home was the knowledge that when the moment came, when every instinct screamed at her to save herself, she'd chosen to be the person her father raised her to be. The person who crossed rivers. Because courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the refusal to let fear make your decisions. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is decide that someone else's life matters more than your own safety. Rachel Keane never talked much about that night. She didn't need to. The 280 men who came home because she crossed that river, they did the talking for her. They named their daughters after her. They told their grandchildren about the medic who wouldn't give up. They built a monument in her hometown with her name carved in stone and a simple inscription, "She crossed." That's all it said. Because sometimes that's all you need to say. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when the moment demands it, leave a comment below. Tell me about someone you know who crossed their river, who did the impossible thing because it was the right thing. And if you want more stories about the courage that lives in everyday heroes, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because these stories matter. They remind us who we can be when we refuse to look away from the hard things.